Okay, hey friends, here I am. Hope everything is audible and all that kind of good stuff. Just starting out. So let's see, where am I at here? Why am I doing this? I'm doing this topic of the evolution of novelties because I put up a poll and asked people who watch my YouTube channel what they wanted to hear about, gave them a couple of choices, and this topic won out, which is fine. It's a great topic. And then the reason I put this among the list of things, yes, I put spiders and stuff in there too, and nobody wants to talk about spiders. Anyway, the reason I put this one up there is this is a really common creationist issue that I have heard so often that, oh, there are no transitional forms. There's no way new features could evolve. It's ridiculous. It's silly. Of course they can. We've got lots of examples of them. So what I'm going to do today is I picked one and I'll just talk about a couple of papers that discuss this. And I've got a few asides I need to make. So first of all, they're arguing that, oh, we this is never observed. We can't see these new forms arising. No one has ever seen a chicken give birth to a cat, for instance. So I found an example. Yeah. There we go. We've just proven evolution, right? Aren't they cute? Obviously, no, we haven't. This is nothing to do with evolution. This is just a cute little video. But yeah, the whole idea that we'd have one form giving rise to another form, no, that's not how it works. You're not going to see dogs giving birth to cats, or cats giving birth to dogs, or chickens giving birth to cats. To use that as an objection against evolution tells us that, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about, because that's not what is predicted at all. So the thing is that you can go onto something like PubMed and just do a search on evolutionary novelty, like I did here. You all know about PubMed, don't you? It's a really useful resource. It's the NIH service. It's got a lot of the biomedical literature stored on there. Not so much the ecological and literature, but yeah, we got lots of good cell biology and molecular biology on there. And I just put in the search term evolutionary novelty and told it to search. And look what I got. 1,673 results. You can just scroll through here. There's all these papers exactly on that topic. 168 pages of papers. The distressing thing too is I did this search, a couple days ago, getting ready for this. I think it was like 3 or 4 days ago, and the answer then was 1,662. So they've had 11 new papers since a couple of days ago. It's you cannot keep up with this stuff. There's lots of good literature out there that you can read. So to say that you don't know of any examples is just professing ignorance, because it's all over the place. So let's dig into one really good example, I think. So while I was searching through here somewhere, I found a paper by Wagner, and I'm a fan of Wagner's work. So I pulled that out, and it's titled Evolutionary Novelties. Yeah, it makes it really hard to find, doesn't it? Gosh, I can't find any papers on evolution. And then there's 1,600 plus right there on PubMed, really easy to find and accessible. Anyway, so Wagner and his associate Lynch have written a paper on just this. It's a short paper. It's a review paper on a couple of things. And one of the things that struck me when I read it is that this historical anecdote. So there's this fellow, St. George Jackson Mivart. I don't know if you've heard of him. Mivart was a very well-known 19th century biologist. His claim to fame was he did a lot of work on primatology. So he did a lot of classification of primates, dissections, identification of features. And he was quite convinced that animals changed over time, that evolution occurred, all this kind of good stuff that we take for granted. But St. George Jackson Mivart was a weird guy. He believed in evolution, all right. He accepted change over time. He accepted the phylogenetic tree, all that kind of good stuff. That's what he was studying when he was looking at primates. But he objected to natural selection. He did not believe that natural selection was the answer. He asked this question of Darwin. All right, so he's asking if it was conceivable that the young of any animal was ever saved from destruction by accidentally sucking a drop of scarcely nutritious fluid from an accidentally hypertrophied cutaneous gland of its mother. Yeah, he's trying to argue that there's no way natural selection could give rise to something as important to the survival of mammals as a mammary gland. You probably already recognize the style of this argument. This is the argument from personal incredulity. He couldn't figure out, hey, how could there possibly be something that evolved in some sort of way, from a non-mammary gland to a mammary gland? How can that occur? And this is one of the topics in Wagner's paper. It's in a review of the evidence for the evolution of the mammalian breast. And it's clearly not a problem. Biochemically, genetically, evolutionarily, it's really not at all an issue. It happened. Got to get used to that. And obviously, though, mammary glands don't fossilize. So we'll have to see how do we know that it evolved? Because we don't have fossil mammary glands. And that's okay. All right. I wanted to say a little bit about good old St. George, though, because he's a fascinating guy when you get into it. So, like I said, he's a credentialed scientist in the 19th century. He's a smart guy. He did some really good work on primatology. Yeah, so he's figuring all this stuff out. He's got no problem with species changing over time, but he's got some other problems. It seems like he was a little bit of a troll and a troublemaker. So he had a very serious fallout with Charles Darwin. Yeah, in the late 19th century, you didn't want to get on Charles Darwin's bad side, and I'll show you just how bad it got. So here's good old St. George Jackson Mivart, very British. Yeah, and there he is posing for us all. And he got into all these battles with various people of the time. It's too bad he didn't live here in the 21st century, because he would take to Twitter easily. Yeah, he'd be on YouTube challenging everybody to a debate. That's the kind of guy he was. And he was kind of constantly put down by this. Now, in some ways, I kind of feel sympathy for him, because one of his other characteristics is that Mivart was a Catholic. And I did not realize this, but in the time of Darwin and Mivart, Catholics were not allowed to attend Oxford University. He was thoroughly qualified to go to the most prestigious university in the land, but he was flatly refused because he was Catholic. What a weird thing. Yeah, I have no sympathy for Catholics in general. I think it's a silly religion, but then so is Anglicanism. But I do have a lot of sympathy for people who are discriminated against. He was clearly discriminated against, which is just really a shame. Okay, but he got into all these battles with people, and he's going to end up alienating everyone. So here, for instance, he had a big, literary fight with Charles Darwin. And what brought it on? Well, this was in the 1870s. Charles Darwin's son, George, wrote a letter to one of the newspapers that was basically arguing, hey, divorce can be a good thing. If you've got an abusive husband, yeah, the better thing to do is to divorce him. And so he's advocating for more liberal laws about divorce, about giving women more autonomy, all those kind of things that we would say right now is a good idea. And Meaver just went on, and he blew his top over this, and he wrote all these letters denouncing George Darwin as immoral, as criminal in his beliefs. And as you might guess, that this kind of annoyed Charles. And here's a letter that Charles wrote, which apparently did not actually get sent out, but it's in his, Charles was a very cautious person. He would not have thrived in internet culture, because his thing was, okay, he'd write this down and put it down, and he'd think about it for a day before he'd send it off. And apparently this did not get sent off, but he wrote to Meaver that your article in the QR, the Quarterly Review, I think that was, for July 1874 contains a wholly false and malicious accusation against my son, Mr. G. Darwin. You had a fair opportunity in the following number of retracting your infamous and explicit accusation. That's the accusation of immorality. And you did not even make this small reparation. Your article also includes deliberate misrepresentations of what I have published. Therefore, I refuse to hold for the future any communication with you, sir. Yeah. So Charles Darwin blocked him, basically, canceled him, said, no, you're done. I am the most famous scientist in the world, and we're not going to be communicating anymore. Yeah, so it's, Nestle says, or an abusive spouse. Well, maybe. I don't know. A lot of Victorian gentlemen might be willing to concede that, yes, sometimes men are abusive, but couldn't imagine an abusive wife. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so this is the basis of a huge amount of contention here. So he's a pariah in the scientific community. He also picked fights with Huxley and all these other people. And as it says up here, still he tried to profess friendship for Darwin and to excuse his actions, but a number of Darwin supporters shunned him. And although critical of the theory of natural selection, especially as applied to humans, I should mention also Wallace did not like to apply selection to humans. He thought the human intellect was a divine gift, and so that's something different. So he's still critical of the theory of natural selection, but he did support broadly evolutionary views. And this I thought was a little misleading in this article. Yes, he was excommunicated from the Catholic Church shortly before his death. It had nothing to do with his views on evolution. Not one thing. To the Catholic Church, then and now, the issue of evolution was not that big a deal. They were fairly tolerant of evolutionary ideas. Okay, so he's excommunicated from the church, though. So what was he excommunicated for? Because he picked a fight with the church as well. And this is kind of hilarious. He wrote an article. Yeah, it's an article called Happiness in Hell. And I'll include a link down below because it's a blast to read. That what this is Mivart is taking exception to the Catholic doctrine of hell. Yes, he didn't think it was a place of eternal punishment. So as he says here, this is the last page of the article, he says, nothing, in fact, has been defined by the church on the subject of hell, which does not accord with right reason, the highest morality, and the greatest benevolence. So he's trying to flatter the Catholic Church a little bit here. Yeah, they're all for reason, morality, benevolence. Doesn't that sound exactly like the Catholic Church to you? Anyway, he goes on to argue on that basis that God was moral and benevolent and all this thing. So he says, according to it, no one in the next life suffers the deprivation of any happiness which he can imagine or desire, or which is congruous with his nature and faculties, save by his conscious and deliberate choice. According to it also, God has refused to no man who fully obeys the voice of conscience, heathen though he may be, the full beatitude of the light of glory and the beatific vision. Yeah, so he's saying, well, you know, if you can imagine happy pagans, people who didn't believe in Christianity, but still couldn't be thrown into hell, there they are. So he says, hell in its widest sense, namely as including all those blameless souls who do not enjoy that vision, must be considered as for them an abode of happiness. Yes, hell must be considered an abode of happiness, transcending all our most vivid anticipations, so that man's natural capacity for happiness is there gratified to the very utmost. Nor is it even possible for the Catholic theologian of the most severe and rigid school to deny that, thus considered, there is and there will for all eternity be a real and true happiness in hell. He kind of messed up there, because he says, okay, it's not even possible for a Catholic theologian to imagine a punishing hell. Of course they did. And this is what got him kicked out of the Catholic Church. He was a very devout Catholic. He just had his own weird interpretation of Catholicism. And if you read this article, you might have a lot of, it's a loony article, because he's making all these claims about the nature of a metaphysical place just on the basis of his reasonable conclusion about how a benign God would operate. But it's actually kind of a sympathetic perspective he's got, that yeah, God wouldn't throw people into a hell of eternal torment. He also argues that souls in hell could learn, that they'd be given the opportunity to eventually come to Jesus from their experience in hell. So yeah, it's not a great idea as far as the Catholic Church goes, but to us pagans, it's probably a little bit attractive. So yeah, he's arguing there's truly happiness in hell. So better believe it. And of course, the church then kicked him out. Okay, so that's enough about poor St. George Mivart. That, again, I kind of feel sorry for him. What a horrible fate. He's a devout Catholic. He really believes in the Catholic Church. And then to be, excommunicated shortly before his death is kind of unfortunate. Even if he doesn't believe in natural selection, is wrong there. But that again, you don't get punished by the Catholic Church so much for belief in scientific ideas as you do from going against the doctrines of the church. So anyway, let's get back on track here. So this is that paper by Gunther Wagner and Lynch, all about evolutionary novelties. It uses an example the evolution of the mammary gland. And there's a lot of detail in this paper. I won't get into it all. Even for a short paper, he talks about multiple examples here. So here would you believe this diagram is about the evolution of mammary glands? But this diagram, it is. I'll show you a better diagram. He makes a number of interesting statements here. So he talks about the regulation of the genes behind it. There are basically 7 major signaling gene receptor pairs that are involved in early development. They just have lots of little subtle variants. So yeah, we can talk about hedgehog in general, but then there's all these different variants of hedgehog, like piggy-winkle hedgehog, believe it or not, or Indian hedgehog or sonic hedgehog. They're all parts of the family. So there's basically 7 families that have been identified so far that are really essential for development of various morphological features and physiological features that are expressed in the embryo. And the regulation of those is modulated in different lineages in different ways. So he talks a bit about that, which is always good to see. And I don't know how you can argue that you can't have any kind of molecular transformation of these features in development and evolution. So yes, it's all very, very silly what people do to argue against this. Another thing he points out in this article that, well, many of you may already know, but it's kind of a disconcerting view of us mammals, is he points out that there's a key feature of the mammalian skin, our epidermis and dermis, and that is it's glandular. That the very different thing about mammals compared to things like birds and other reptiles is all these glands that are all over our skin. Yeah, we're oozing all the time, so we're pretty slimy compared to a lot of other things. So, if you've got pet reptiles, feel the snake sometime. I know some people think they're slimy. They're not. They're really dry, very silky smooth, unlike us mammals who are covered with these slime oozing glands. We're just used to it, so we don't think it's a big deal. So how did mammary glands evolve then? Well, here's what we go, how we go about it is you look at our distant ancestors, and we still see this in things like amphibians and so forth, is they have this mucus surface epithelia. Again, glandular skin. We are just covered with glands everywhere. And they secrete things like this. Xanthine oxidase reductase and lysozyme, these enzymes, these proteins that are being oozing out from all these pores. XOR is, man, I should do a video on just that. XOR is a really interesting enzyme. It's got so many functions. Yeah, it's got functions like in purine synthesis. It's got functions in what else is it? Reactive oxygen species. It's just doing a whole bunch of things. It's a complicated enzyme that's got multiple roles to play. And we've also got this lysozyme, which is that's just an enzyme that breaks down other proteins. So it's a digestive enzyme, basically. Yeah, you're secreting digestive enzymes from your skin, and you're also secreting this particular enzyme. And what happened in the evolution of these of us mammals, just in general, including us male mammals, is that we have this involution of the epidermis, and this epidermis also branches. And again, this is a really common phenomena in epithelia in all kinds of animals, is invaginating epithelia just seem to branch all over the place to make little lobules everywhere. One other example of that would be like your lungs, all that stuff. That's an invaginating epithelium, and it breaks out into these little bumps and lobules. that we just adapt that intrinsic property to make respiratory surfaces. But in this case, this is the outer skin, the epithelium of the ectodermis, and we're sitting there, we're secreting all these things. These have a protective function. Yeah, exor and lysozymes are things that bacteria and viruses don't particularly like to encounter because they'll get broken down by these enzymes. They'll be destroyed by these enzymes. So you can imagine why we evolved these sorts of things. And they're oozing all these enzymes. And mammary glands are just a special case of that, where we've continued all this branching. All this branching is going on. They're secreting these things. Exor, for instance, has another role, which is in processing fat droplets. Ooh, does this sound familiar? We're talking about mammary glands, and we've got enzymes that are going to be important in processing the molecules in fat droplets. Lysosome is going to be important for digesting lactose and lactalbumin. All these kinds of things are just going to be produced by these. So it's a fairly natural progression that you go from this secretory gland on your surface to pumping out all these secretory substances, secreted substances, like these nice proteins that are also processing lipids, that are processing carbohydrates. Oh, is it hard to imagine going from this to a mammary gland? Not at all. Now, this next paper that I looked at, this one, the Evo-Devo, the mammary gland, proposes a couple of things. This paper I thought was incredibly hard to read, and one of the reasons is, look at all those acronyms. It is peppered with acronyms. When you're talking about a subject that's foreign to other people, avoid acronyms, especially not to this degree. And some of these acronyms are really important and get used all over the place. So my favorite is this one right here, the mammalobular pilosebaceous unit. Ooh, doesn't that sound interesting? What is that? We also have, let's see, APSU, the apopilosebaceous unit. I'll come back to those. I'm not going to try and talk about all of these, but yeah, these are the APSU and the MPSU are kind of important to this model of how mammary glands evolved. So we're going to look at, in this paper, we're going to look at different clades and see exactly what's going on inside them. And what we find is that there is an existing progression of differentiation of mammary tissue in different groups of mammals. Yeah, so I'll come back to this figure in a moment. But the paper does a nice review of, for instance, here's the mammary glands of monotremes. And what do they look like in monotremes? They do produce a kind of milk for their offspring. And it's got these invaginated glands that are secreting all these substances. They are associated with hairs. So we got a hair-like structure with, the base of the hair having all these other glands like sebaceous glands and so forth that are secreting these substances that then the baby echidna, for instance, licks off the fur of its mother. This is actually addressing Mievert's concern because, he's arguing, oh, how could you imagine something that's barely nutritious being selected for increasing nutritional value? And this is an intermediate step that has been preserved in a living lineage of organisms, and we can see it. So it's thought that what was first going on is you've got these glands that are just like the glands we have in our hairs right now. where they're secreting oils, sebaceous glands. And one of the reasons we do that is these glands are used in some ancient ancestor to lubricate the surface of the egg. Ancient mammals have one thing that makes them a little bit deficient compared to, for instance, birds and reptiles, is that we think their eggs were very thin and papery, covered with a parchment-like substance. So you've got to maintain that. So you're just constantly not only keeping the egg warm, but you're also coating it with these oily substances to prevent it from drying out. Birds and reptiles, of course, evolved nice calcified eggs that had a little more structure to them, but these early mammals had to do this. And then it just evolved naturally from that to, okay, we got this oily, very, oils are very rich in calories. We've got this oily substance. We've got these enzymes like XOR that process fats and produce fat droplets. Hey, it's a natural progression to that, to the echidna, allowing its babies to nurse just by licking the fluids oozing out of its hairy chest. Yes, that doesn't sound very tasty, but that's the way they work. And then we go to marsupials, and marsupials have also evolved a breast-like tissue. So they've got a placode that forms, that produces this glandular material, and they make, as you see in this diagram here in D, that what they do is they make these ducts. Again, a natural thing for these kinds of glands. They make these ducts that then go to a kind of nipple that's everted in the adult kangaroo or whatever. And that's what the babies can suckle on. And then in mammals, we just take it a step further. Step further, and also they're taking a different path. In mammals, we build this elaborate ductal structure that is also protected at the surface where it erupts into the surface of the skin by the construction of this thickened nipple. But again, it's just yes, this is not at all surprising. This is how things occur. I see a question here. Curious how lysozyme is secreted by mucus glands. Oh, okay. That's the next, and the last slide I'll subject you to. This is that same diagram. And there's a curious feature of our sebaceous glands. They're typically associated with the hair follicle. So that's probably what came first, is we got to make hairs. And then associated with these hairs, there are these sebaceous glands. And as it mentioned, where's it down here? Okay, down here, the ancestral APSU, MPSU. So the APSU is the apopylosebaceous unit. So it's just there to support a hair. It's the associated structures with making hairs, keeping them lubricated, all that kind of good stuff. And so there we've got a sebaceous gland that's secreting all these substances. And in mammals, it's just getting specialized to form this mammalobular pilar sebaceous unit. I think I remember the meaning of that acronym. Anyway, they're going to make this sort of thing. And what you can see when you look from monotremes to marsupials to eutherians is monotremes have a distinctive hair that's part of this. As I said, it's a hairy patch on the chest of the animal that's oozing all these fluids, and the babies are just licking the hairs to get it out of there. Marsupials retain to a small degree those hairs, but you see they don't erupt to the surface. And they got this invagination that's eventually going to avert to form the nipple of the marsupial. But there we got this reduction of the hairs. There's the sebaceous gland. We're also seeing this specialization, increasing specialization of this tissue that is secreting all those tasty proteins. Yeah, and also those tasty fats. And we eutherians have just done the same thing. It's now very clearly associated with a prominent nipple, but it's the same structure, the same glandular structure there. So it initially starts out as a tripartite structure. So sebaceous glands producing oils, and these other glands are secreting substances like exor and lysozyme, all associated with a hair follicle. And what we get is the gradual reduction of the hair follicle to produce what we've got, our mammary glands. It's all very lovely. Yeah. Also in this diagram, you can see some other details. So again, like I said, we're starting with a structure that is ancestral to mammals that is not specifically specialized for producing milk. And it's just a secretory structure on the surface of our oozy, slimy, glandular skin, so common to these mammals. And then we just get this increasing specialization of a region of it associated with a placode in the dermis to produce the mammary gland itself. It also points out, this is not a weird thing, that we come from a lineage where here it shows basal tetrapods who also had very slimy skin. And that leads to amphibians, which we all agree have pretty slimy, oozy, glandular skin. It's just a little bit more than maybe mammals do, but we do this too. Where we've got multiple glands in the surface of the epidermis that are secreting various substances. And it can be all kinds of things, not just mucus, but, I'm thinking specifically of things like those salamanders that secrete tetrodotoxin. So you can take these glands and you can specialize them progressively over time to produce these things. We mammals have, instead of making toxins, are instead producing tasty, nutritious milk for our offspring. So that's just a different direction. This also points out that, birds and squamates, the reptiles, the familiar reptiles, have a unique thing that we don't have. They have more than one unique thing that we don't have. But one of the things that's interesting about their biochemistry is we are producing alpha keratins, and that produces a different kind of tissue. Alpha keratins are rich in alpha helices. If you know your protein structures, they make lots of coils. Alpha keratins also have similarities to spider silk, just to drag those in here. So what we do is make this fibrous mat with all these long fibers that felt like make a structure of our skin. While meanwhile, birds and other reptiles have evolved something called a beta keratin. Beta keratins are rather different in structure. Beta keratins are rich in beta pleated sheets. So these parallel rows of proteins that link together and form these more rigid structures. And that's where we get things like scales, and feathers are also an adaptation of this. Those are made with oh man, I'm getting so many phone messages tonight. Never mind. Anyway, where was I? Oh, so yeah, that's a unique difference that evolved in that other group that we don't have, and that's the beta keratins, which allow for these like plate-like scales and so forth. We're just not that good at making that. Okay, I hope that it's a superficial gloss on these papers, but there it is. So yeah, well, it's kind of clear how mammary glands evolved, and contrary to Mevert, there are clear antecedents to mammary glands, and I kind of don't blame him for not knowing about echidnas, and maybe not too much about marsupials. He's very British. You send prisoners off those southern lands, but yeah, things like platypus surprised everyone. So we got these exotic animals that were great examples of intermediate steps in the evolution of the mammary glands. And you can see that in this top row in the diagram right there, that we got this changing transformation. Let's see, people mentioned sebum. Yeah, sebaceous glands ooze sebum. If you don't wash your hair regularly, it kind of accumulates. It's fatty and oily, and it can build up on the surface of your skin as well. So, right. And believe it or not, that's a precursor to making milk. Okay, are there any other questions here in the chat? I got to look back over it. Oh, let's see, what is this about stem cells? Somebody said something about stem cells. Oh, a few early questions. How did religion block scientific progress when the Catholic Church didn't care about evolution? Well, they cared a little bit, but yeah, that the Catholic Church was not an obstacle to the acceptance of evolution. You can definitely find some priests who were against it, still can, but as an institution, it was not opposed to it. And you know, here where I live, there's two school systems. There's the Catholic school down the road over here, and there's also the public elementary school. The Catholic school, from all I've heard, does a far better job of teaching evolutionary biology, you know, on the level you would do in a grade school, than does the public school. That's kind of unfortunate. So yeah, in this case, this is a clear example where it wasn't science that got poor St. George Meaver excommunicated. It was his weird views on Catholic doctrine. Okay. Let's see, what else we got here? Oh, yeah, Ronnie Reagan's spiritual advisor that spoke in tongues set U.S. stem cell research back a decade. Yeah, I don't want to defend the Catholic Church. I hate doing that because they've got so many other bad things about them. But in general, the Catholic Church has been kind of hands off on scientific progress. They've got a few extra centuries of experience with this, and they know that if they come out and say something stupid, you know, even St. Augustine warned them about this. If you come out and say something stupid about the natural world, and you get caught in it later on, that's not good. That hurts your reputation. So they've been a lot more cautious than some of the other religions. Yeah, in this country, it's mainly the Protestant religions that have gone bat poop crazy. Yeah. Okay, let me stop the sharing. Yeah, so you can see my face here and my lovely laboratory. Anyway, yeah, so it's a tough one for a militant atheist like myself, that I can't exactly blame the Catholic Church for halting progress. Okay, yeah, there's the example of witches in the past. They did subscribe to a lot of superstitious beliefs, but then everybody did. Yeah, there was, you go look at English history, and it's the Protestants who are running around doing horrible things. Same with American history. Yeah, the Red Scare, all that kind of stuff. That's superstitious behavior, and it's can't be ascribed to the Catholic Church. So quit making me defend them. All right. Yes, and Nestle points out, yeah, isn't slimy skin more ancestral? Yes. So I showed that in that last slide, that amphibians had glands all over the place, but they were different. That it seems like, in our ancestry, or the ancestral form, the ancestral tetrapod that led to us, also greatly adapted keratins. Amphibian skin isn't very rich in keratins. So terrestrial tetrapods started using this lovely molecule of keratin more heavily to insulate and to protect them from drying out and all this other good stuff. So they compromise between slimy glandular skin and a tough leathery skin that would protect them from the environment. Okay. We got to come in here about Google Scholar. Yeah, Google Scholar is a pretty good source to use. We actually recommend that our students use that. Not just to Google something, but go to Google Scholar. It's curated a little bit better, and you'll get better sources. It's still not perfect. Yeah, I go to Google Scholar and I can find Journal of Cosmology stuff. So there's Ron Joseph and his BS. But otherwise, in general, if it's legitimately published, it'll make it there. Let's see. Stephen Jay Gould calls mistaken science history cardboard histories. Ooh, you might have to remind me of that. Yeah, Gould has been dead for 20 years. It's a real shame, but that means I haven't read my Stephen Jay Gould recently. I've got all of his books, but I should maybe do a little browsing. Okay. Oh yeah. So Gould says that the trope of religion was blocking progress is the exact opposite of what happened. And that is true. For instance, clergy was vital in the key geology discoveries related to the ice ages. Right. In Darwin's time, for instance, there were a lot of theologians who were out prowling around with a rock hammer, looking at things. So yeah, there's a difference between the kind of repulsive, hostile religion that we get if we look at, for instance, Jimmy Swaggart or the Austines or things like that, and the kinds of religion that is legitimately tolerant of studying the natural world, who is willing to recognize that the natural world is, God's creation. So yes, please do go study that. But then you look at people like Kent Hovind or Ken Ham or any of the fundamentalists, and what you find is a denial of that everything is in the Bible, and there's no point to studying the natural world except to confirm your beliefs in the Bible. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yimmy says other people were attacking natural selection and not the church. So yes, it is true. There were quite a few people, especially during the period called the Eclipse of Darwin, which was after about 1870, 1880, when we were lacking a good theory of heredity. And Darwin's theory just did not. Yes, I actually put a question about that on the exam I gave my genetics students. That I asked them to explain to me what was contradictory about Darwin's gemular hypothesis and pangenesis and all the stuff with Darwin's theory of evolution. Because when you sit down and actually scrutinize them carefully and try and fit them together, oh man, it just does not work. So, and a lot of people felt that way, that here you got this bad theory of inheritance, you got this theory of evolution, they fight with each other. Which one are you going to question? A lot of people said, okay, I'm going to question evolution. So there is a history of legitimate, honest, sincere questioning of evolutionary theory. Always has been. And you can't pretend that evolution was a dogma and no one was allowed to question it ever, because no, they were fighting tooth and nail over it for many years. And even once Mendel is rediscovered, after 1900, oh man, the battles that were fought, there was the gradualists and there were the saltationists and all of these people struggling to interpret genetics in the light of evolution, and people fighting about this stuff. It's kind of a cool literature to read because, yeah, serious scientists in great battles. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of that battle is that many of the people who got on that bandwagon turned out to be real big proponents of eugenics. So eugenics, there's this big battle, and eugenics kind of squirted out of the conflict and infected a lot of things. Let's see. Oh, wait. Okay, I'm going to disagree with you, Yemi. I've agreed with a lot of things you said, but you say creationism pretty much regional in the USA, and not any kind of universal Christian position. That is not true. Yeah, we tend to see a lot of stereotyping of, oh, creationism, that's a Southern thing. That's just down there. But it's not true. Creationism is everywhere. Here I am in a very northern, very Yankee state that takes great pride in its northern status. We sent soldiers to fight in the Civil War on the right side, all this kind of good stuff. And there are creationists all over the place. Twin Cities Creation Science Association, they've been kind of falling on hard times lately and getting less and less popular, but they're there. Moody Bible Institute, that's in Minneapolis. A lot of the founding documents of evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity were from northern authors. You just can't deny it. And so no, it's not a regional thing. It's a countrywide thing, and it's really unfortunate. Okay. Okay, Brian mentions it's not only the Christians who contribute, the Islamics are much worse. Oh, I'd be really careful there. Yeah, that Islam has got kind of, I don't understand Islam that well. I'm not going to say anything about the details of how Islam handles evolution, but for the most part, Islam has a scholarly tradition, and if you've got a scholarly tradition, like Judaism and some forms of Christianity, you tend to be very tolerant of scientific views. And so there's a lot of Islam that's pretty much on board. What you're seeing is a growth of a kind of fundamentalist Islamic faith. And a lot of that has been a result of proselytization by Christians. Yeah, classic example is Turkey. Turkey was such a secular state, yet still definitely in majority Islam state. And there was a huge amount of propaganda flowing into Turkey by way of all these people who were going to Turkey to search for Noah's Ark. And when you look at the Islamic version of creationism, the stuff like coming out of Harun Yahya, who I wonder what's happening with him. It sounds like he was thrown into a Turkish prison, and he may be suffering horribly. I don't know. Anyway, but through the likes of people like Harun Yahya, that is just literally stealing flood geology from the 1960s. Things like Whitcomb and Morris. It's kind of astonishing that you've got this offshoot of Islam that has so thoroughly stolen everything they could from fundamentalist Christians like 1960s Whitcomb and Morris. So I'm really cautious about blaming Islam for this sort of thing. Okay, sebum is what a lot of human parasites like, right? Yeah, it's oils and fats and proteins all mixed in there. Ooh, delicious. Yeah, maybe not to us, but lots of animals would find that very tasty. Yes, so sebaceous glands work in tandem with the sweat-producing eccrine glands to regulate body temperature. Yep, that's another function. Okay, what else we got? So let's see. So icky biofilms on skin and hair have something to do with milk. Yep. Definitely. Yeah, don't apologize. It's okay. I wanted to see some back and forth in the comments. Oh, a question. I'm curious what you think of Lima de Feria's Evolution Without Selection. I have not read it. I don't know it. Is it something I should look at? Because there is a lot of evolution that goes on without selection. You can drive evolution with drift and recombination, all that kind of good stuff. So it depends on what he's talking about. If he's going to conjure up some mystical thing that does it. Yeah, Mevert, for instance, he's doesn't believe in natural selection. What does he do to say instead? He says it's all instinct, that we have inbuilt programs that lead us down the evolutionary path. That's kind of a mystical nonsense kind of idea. But so, yeah, I don't know what de Feria's ideas are. Sorry. Let's see. What else we got here? It's pure naturalism without any realism. Okay. All right. I think we've reached the end here. What time? Oh, perfect. All right. We got, oh, Brian, you mentioned the QC is in my wheelhouse. What is the QC? Say he's an authority where? I'm lost now. So maybe the last thing is Brian can clarify this and explain it to me so I learned something new. Oh, another question about what do we think of process theology like that of Teilhard de Chardin or Wilhelm Reich? Oh, Desjardins is another one we could spend a whole hour talking about. No, I despise Desjardins. I think he's, it's basically Christian teleology. So no, I don't think much of it at all. I don't know about Wilhelm Reich. That's not the Reich associated with orgone, is it? Oh, quantum computing. Brian was talking about quantum computing. Okay. No, that one's way out of my wheelhouse. So I'll let you talk about that. That's a question. Do you believe the concept of evolution will be accepted more by the circles which do not accept the concept now? I can imagine a fundamentalist future in which the regressive forces take over. It's really easy to imagine nowadays in the United States. But I think if I take an optimistic view, those circles which do not accept evolution are going to gradually fade away and disintegrate. And then we won't have to worry about them. Yeah, these are cultural concepts, cultural artifacts that are confining people's beliefs in science. And I'm hoping they will go away. Just, again, not because I'm going to go out there and shoot people who believe in that stuff, but just that they'll gradually get more informed and they'll learn better and they'll get away from it. That's the hope anyway. Okay, it's been almost an hour, and I do try to keep these things to an hour, just so I don't burn you all out. Yeah, I could ramble on for hours. My students know this. So I'm going to just close it there. Thank you so much for joining and contributing in the Q&A. If there are other things you'd like me to talk about, leave comments, tell me what I should talk about. I'm also thinking, we're doing this through the chat mechanism here. And I'm wondering if maybe I should try using good old Discord to do this. Yeah, I saw Nestle around. I bet she knows about this. That maybe next time what I should do is set up the sound stuff on our Discord server. You all know about that, right? We have a Discord server. I'll include a link to that as well down below. And maybe next time we'll have people chiming in over Discord until it turns into utter anarchy and chaos and there's a screaming match, and then I'll have to silence people. But we'll try it next time. Okay, thanks again. Talk to y'all later. Yeah, join our Discord server, join my Patreon, like and subscribe, all the usual things all those YouTube people say. And I will end it right here. Thank you very much again. End stream. Yes, end.